Hey there, survivors. Thanks for tuning in to tonight's episode. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. It really helps me keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now let's get started. I didn't want to leave the cabin. It had my cuts in the doorway and my pencil marks on the beam where we measured Mark's height each year. It had the smell of oak smoke baked into the wood, and the small dents on the table where a pan fell during a storm. And we laughed because laughing was cheaper than replacing anything. But the road had learned our name. By the end of the first month, too many sets of eyes had found the clearing. Jer, the ATV crew, the quiet pair at the clinic, and the shadows who tested the cans at night. Once people learn your place, they start writing it into their plans. We didn't vote. We laid out the reasons in neat rows like tools on a towel. Distant engines at odd hours. A cut in the west tripwire where no animal would cut. Bootprints that doubled back to the same tree as if someone stood there taking notes. More infected walkers in the hour before dawn, drifting through the bend in the logging road like they were following a scent that didn't belong to us, but was close enough to confuse them. The cabin was not as remote as I had once liked to think. We built a move plan the way you build a fire. Small, deliberate, in stages. 2 trips, maximum. Load 1, food, water treatment, medicine, the solar suitcase, the radio, the crossbow and the rifle with the 3 magazines I kept for the rifle and the box of bolts for the bow. Load 2, tools, tarps, cordage, the hand tools that move a shelter from place to sleep to place to live. Everything else would have to earn its weight twice. I wrote the list in block letters, then read it back while Lena added 2 lines. Cough syrup and a spare kettle. She said a spare kettle was not a luxury, and I didn't argue because a person who can heat water on a bad day is a person who can still make choices. Mark pulled a collapsible cart from behind the shed and set to work on the wheels. He had salvaged the frame from a deer hauling rig years ago and replaced the axle with something stronger. He sat on the porch with a small wrench, tightened everything until it didn't squeak, then added a rubber strip cut from an old truck mud flap to quiet the axle. He showed me a fold-down handle he'd made from a broomstick and 2 hinges. I told him it was good work. He shrugged like compliments itch but smiled anyway. We stripped the cabin the way you strip a campsite when you want to leave no trace for the next group. The bell line came down, wiped clean of prints and oil. The can lines got untied and buried in the compost pile in case we ever needed to return and build fast. We pulled the stakes from the pits and filled them in with branches and soil so some stranger wouldn't learn a lesson they didn't deserve. I took one last walk around the clearing at a slow pace, my eyes doing the quiet counting people do at gas stations when they're deciding whether to leave the tank for morning. We left at first light. The air carried the scent of wet needles and the last of the spring chill. Lena locked the door even though the door didn't mean as much as it once did. She taped one small piece of paper inside the frame, our old radio frequency and the name Doyle, in case the neighbor who never learned the code for his garage door managed to make it this far. Not because it would work, because it was right. We didn't take the road. We cut southeast under the hemlocks where the ground is soft and holds tracks like gossip. Mark walked point for the first hour, slow and careful, because he wanted to show he had learned the discipline. He picked lines that carried us through the quietest ground and placed his feet where mine would go without being told. I watched the spaces between the trees and counted birds. Birds are honest. When the woods go mute, that's usually someone else's choice. By mid-morning, we reached the low run, where the old ATV path slumps into clay and then climbs out. I checked the edges for the drags and telltales I had rigged before. The tiny leaf I had balanced on a twig was on the ground and wet. Not wind wet, touched wet. Someone had passed here since last rain. Not today. Not yesterday. Enough to remind us that the map we carried in our heads was out of date the minute we stepped off the porch. The route I wanted lived in the folds of the hills, not on the lines the mapmaker thought mattered. We hugged drainages and stayed below ridges to avoid skyline silhouettes. We crossed one dry creek by stepping on stones I knew from old trout days, and kept going until the trees thinned and the angle of the light told me we were about to see the back of a little valley, with nothing in it but old picnic tables and the ghosts of weekend noise. The sign for the place lay face down in weeds, but I knew it anyway. The old Black Hollow family campground sat between two ridges like a coin in a slot. When it was still running, families from Kane and Tionesta and Warren used to park here for July weekends, teach toddlers to ride bikes in circles, and argue about who forgot the mustard. I had come once, long ago, to catch smallmouth in the riverbend that hid behind a line of alders east of the main loop. The sign's paint had cracked into 1,000 little islands. Someone had turned an RV sideways across the road like a cork in a bottle. We circled wide and watched. The geometry of the place had that rare mix I liked. One narrow road in, natural flanks on 3 sides where the ridges came down steep, and a water barrier on the 4th side where the river slid past. A small wooden footbridge crossed that river near the back, the kind of bridge 2 people can pull down with a pry bar if they have to make points quickly about access. There were old bear-proof lockers scattered near the picnic tables, rusted but intact. Someone had lashed saplings together to make low palisade fences along the obvious gaps. It had once looked cared for by people who understood what could be done with rope and time. The smell hit when the wind shifted. Not fresh, not clean, but old heat and things that stopped being somebody. Near the main lodge, a long low building with a porch where the snack bar used to sell ice cream in plastic baseball helmets. There was a pit the size of a shallow pool. It had been a fire until it wasn't. Inside were the outlines of bodies baked black and then turned to ashy shapes. Dozens. Whoever had lived here burned what they had to burn, and did it fast and hot. The dirt around the pit had scorched and stayed that way. A shovel lay near the edge, handle cracked. We took the long way around the lodge and approached the storage sheds. One had the door kicked in, the other still held a hasp, bent but salvageable. Inside we found lath, wire, a crate of broken tent poles, a bundle of rebar, and a stack of old plastic chairs smashed in a corner. No food, no water cans, no tarps. Even the cheap knives that good campers ignore were gone. Whoever left in a hurry after staying long enough to take everything that sat still. The layout told a clear story. The entrance road, choked by the RV, made a funnel where a small team could manage traffic. Firing lanes had been cut. Brush pushed back to give the defenders lines to the road and to the back path near the bridge. On the inside, within those lines, someone had built small shelters out of pallets, lengths of fence, and thick plastic. A medic area had been set in the lodge under the ceiling fans. The cords still dangled where a generator had once plugged into an outlet strip. 2 folding cots sat under a window, sheets stained and stiff, not with the bright, awful color of first minutes, but with the faded iron shade that tells you time did more work than anyone wanted. The lock on the lodge's side door had been snapped from the inside. Drag marks led in a wavering line from that door to the pit and stopped at the edge. I didn't need to fill in the missing frames. Someone turned inside these fences. Someone else did what had to be done and did it late. We didn't set up in the lodge. Big buildings are easy to get into when someone gets it into their head to get in. We chose the maintenance shed near the river, a cinder block box with a single door and one small window high up like an afterthought. It had a view of the footbridge and a back wall almost against the slope. From a defensive standpoint, it made sense. No side windows. Approach lines forced into a V shape by the old chain link on one side and the slope on the other. Escape options in 2 directions if the door got blocked. We pried the door straight, replaced the hasp with our spare, and added a brace inside. A cut beam slotted into brackets we bolted into the floor. Mark ran wire from the solar suitcase to a small power board he had set on a metal shelf where oil cans once lived. He wired the voltage monitor and tested the little LEDs. Green, then yellow, then back to green, when the sun came out from behind a slow cloud. He grinned without swagger. He had a roll, and the roll fit. Lena took the pump house by the river and worked the handle a few dozen times to bring water that had sat too long up into the light. She tested it with her strips, wrote the numbers down, and said we'd boil everything anyway because tired minds make mistakes. She eyed the footbridge and suggested we rig a quick release latch under the near end, 2 pins that could be pulled to drop a plank if we needed to keep something from crossing in a hurry. I loved her for that kind of thinking. The world rewards people who can drop the last step behind them when an argument turns one-sided. We walked the perimeter with a coach's eye. The old wire fencing on the left had sagged, but the posts were solid. We rewired it tighter with salvaged sections and some of the rebar as stakes. On the right, the palisade of saplings looked good until you saw that the lashing had been done with fraying cord that had sat in the sun too long. Mark found 2 intact ratchet straps in a locker, and we refit the lashings. In the clearing before the lodge, we raked lines in the dirt so we could read prints at a glance. I hung glass bottles with a few pebbles in them at knee height along the blind corner near the snack bar and tied them to a low line. We didn't rebuild everything. We rebuilt what we could finish by dark. The first night at Black Hollow tasted of old smoke and damp cinder blocks. We took turns on the door. The river made that soft ticking sound it makes when it drags over small stones, and something somewhere knocked against a metal sign in a pattern that wasn't language but wanted to be. At 2 in the morning, a slow shape drifted across the old road and stopped near the RV. It pressed a hand to the side, then slid its palm along the fiberglass like it believed it could find a seam that would grant it entry. After a while, it moved on. All night I listened for the kind of silence that means listening back. It didn't come. The next day we made the place ours without making it look like home. Mark stretched tripwires with bells near the maintenance shed and the pump house. Lena marked safe water times on the wall and hung a schedule for doses, chores, and sleeps. I took the old sign from the lodge office that said, "Quiet hours 10 p.m., 7 a.m., and set it inside our shed above the door where only we would see it. The words weren't wrong. They just meant something different now. By midday, a thin rain started and fell in a steady sheet. Rain is good for a new place. It quiets sharp sounds, keeps visitors away, and teaches the ground to betray uninvited feet. We spent the afternoon in small work that matters. Organizing the med bin, checking the rifle again, restringing the bow with the newer line. Mark asked if he could paint small marks on the rebar stakes to show their depth for quick replanting. I said yes, and added that any mark he made should mean the same thing in 6 months. He nodded like I had given him permission to be older. We saw our first visitor on the 3rd day. He came on foot just before dusk, stopped at the RV plug, and raised both hands where we could see them. He had the look of a man made of string and stubbornness, the kind of thin that comes with distance walked rather than distance starved. His rain jacket was wrong for this part of Pennsylvania. Lightweight, sea blue, good for mist but not for real weather. He had 1 canteen, 1 pole, and a backpack with only 1 working zipper. "I'm Cal," he said, voice dry, eyes steady. "Cal Rivers. I'm looking for a place to sleep where I won't get robbed. I can pay in information, and I'll work." "What kind of information?" I asked, not moving out of the doorway. He pointed with 2 fingers toward the northwest. 7 miles that way, maybe a little more. I cut through a stand of pines and found a mess of vehicles with the wrong kind of dents. 2 Humvees, 1 truck, 1 trailer tipped, a lot of crates, a lot of spent brass. Looked like army. There was a man under a door frame in the trailer, still breathing when I left. I couldn't lift it alone. I tried. "I can take you there." Lena had the rifle half-shouldered behind me. Mark stood to the side, where the little window in the shed gave him a lane if someone tried to rush. The ritual of trust isn't complicated. It's the price that's steep. "Weapons," I said. "I've got a knife in the belt," Cal replied. "Bone handle. That's it." He pulled it slowly and set it on the road, then stepped back. "If you've got water, I'll wait out here while you decide." We let him sit on the RV step where we could watch him. I placed a bottle on the ground and pushed it with my foot. He took a sip like a man who knows how to drink without looking like he's making a claim on anything. His face didn't show lies. That doesn't mean there weren't any. It just means he knew how to wear them. We spoke inside with the door braced. "It could be a trap," Lena said, and she was right. "It could be our winter," Mark said, and he was right too. "We go," I decided, "but on our terms. He leads and stays in sight. He sleeps outside the inner fence tonight. Tomorrow we move at first light. If he peels off the trail or tries to talk us into a different route, we pull back. We bring the stretcher poles, the pry bar, and both ropes." Cal slept in the open at the roadblock under a tarp we loaned him, within our line of sight. In the early hours, an infected wandered close to the RV and pressed one hand to the side like it believed there was a bell inside it could ring. Cal stayed still. He didn't cough. He didn't clear his throat. He didn't whisper. He was either the kind who can control his noise, or he had learned fast. Both would do. At first light we moved. The air smelled like old rain and leaf mold. Cal kept his hands visible and picked a line that made sense for someone who had actually walked it. He didn't rush and he didn't drag. He kept a pace that allowed eyes to work. The ground told the same story he did. Broken brush at knee height, a few scuffs where boots slipped in clay, a faint trickle of fuel smell riding the damp. 7 miles in wild country is not 7 miles on a track. You walk slower because there are more decisions per yard. We crossed a stream twice, once on stones, and once on a log that threatened to shift. We avoided a low meadow that held water under the grass. We cut along the shoulder of a hill that put our silhouettes below the sky. Cal kept checking the angle of the light the way people do when they have learned that getting caught in the wrong place at the wrong time turns a walk into a story someone else tells. The convoy sat where the trees leaned in and made a long hallway. 2 Humvees faced south, noses slightly off the trail, like they had tried to turn under pressure and half succeeded. The transport truck rested at an angle. One wheel sunk to the hub in mud, the other 3 still on the ground. The armored utility trailer had rolled and come to rest on the edge of a slump where dirt gives way in heavy rain. It lay on its side, door buckled, one hinge twisted. The story of the fight lay on the ground where the casings scattered. Not a firefight that lasted all day. Short, sharp, the kind of shooting that happens when people are surprised at night, then surprised again when their lights draw more trouble. There was blood, not fresh, and the kind that doesn't lie about what happened. In the brush beyond, we saw what had come after. Several dozen infected, some in civilian clothes, a few in torn uniforms, all moving in that same deliberate way as if they had a meeting to get to and would not be rushed. They drifted between trees and paused when their shoulders caught on branches, then moved on, not toward us, not away from us, just through their loop. We went to our knees behind a downed hemlock and watched the patterns. Watching patterns is how you survive any crowded place, even when the crowd is wrong. There was a window. The walkers tended to move along 2 lines that paralleled the track. A quiet gap opened every few minutes when the closest drifted deeper into the trees, and the ones beyond had not yet reached the truck. Cal pointed with 2 fingers at the trailer's door. "He was under that frame when I left," he whispered. He winced after he spoke, not at the words, at the sound of them. We set a plan we could execute without speeches. I would go with Mark to the trailer. Lena would set up in the tree line with the rifle. Low, safe, far enough back to avoid drawing the nearest walkers with her smell or movement if we had to kill quietly. Cal would circle to the far side and throw our noisemaker tripwire into a tangle beyond the second Humvee. When signaled, tin cans on a cord, the same basic logic we used at the cabin, but portable. The goal, draw a portion of the walkers away to give us 2 minutes to lift the frame, pull the man out, and drag him to the downed hemlock. 2 minutes is a long time if you haven't wasted your last 5. We slipped into the gap. Mark kept the pry bar tight to his leg. I carried the rope and the small stretcher poles with the cross braces I had built from a broken ladder. The trailer door groaned when my hand tested it. We waited for that sound to fade into the trees before trying again. Through the gap I saw the man. He wore an off-green uniform shirt darker than the ones I remembered from recruiters' offices, the kind that gets issued to people who sleep near radios. His tags lay against his neck, half buried in dirt. His left leg was pinned below the knee by the doorframe, which had buckled and settled with the weight of the trailer. He was alive because his chest rose in a way you only notice after you've spent too long looking at things that don't. I touched 2 fingers to his neck and found a rhythm that would do. His eyes flickered in that way that means the body is here, and the mind is still deciding. "We're going to lift," I said. Simple words, not loud. "When you feel movement, don't fight it. We've got you." His eyelids fluttered. He did not speak. Good. Words waste air. On my signal, Mark fed the pry bar under the frame at the angle I showed him. He set his feet in the way we practiced with logs and fences. Not wide, not narrow, and eased pressure until the metal decided to give us back a little of what it took. I slid the folded tarp under the officer's leg to give it a smooth exit. The door frame rose slow and complained. That complaint brought two walkers closer, as if they had been waiting for someone to suggest a meeting. I held the door, felt the metal argue with my arms, and managed space while Mark kicked the tarp into place. "Now," I said. We pulled. The leg came free with a sticky resistance that made my teeth want to clench. It wasn't broken in the way that puts bone where it doesn't belong. It was swollen, angry, and marked by a deep line from the edge of the frame. He groaned once, a sound like a man standing after 1,000 squats. A clang from the far side went up, Cal's noisemaker doing its job. Half the walkers reoriented and drifted, drawn like iron to a magnet they couldn't name. Lena placed a single shot into a skull at the edge of the group that didn't take the bait, quiet enough at this distance that it folded into the sounds of the forest. We eased the stretcher poles under the officer and took half his weight each, moving low and direct. The way clear, the downed hemlock offering us the long spine of cover we needed to get to the tree line without making promises we couldn't keep. We got him to the hemlock and handed him to the ground with the kind of control you reserve for heavy glass. He opened his eyes for real this time, took in the green overhead, then filled the world with one syllable: water. I put the bottle to his lips and gave him the kind of sip you give someone who needs the next sip more than the first. He swallowed and let his head rest back. "Name?" I asked. "Dan," he said. "Harker." His voice had the paper-dry edge of someone who'd been saving it for something else. A small dog-eared card in his pocket had Lieutenant Daniel Harker typed next to a faded stamp. He blinked like the canopy made a code he should be able to read. "Okay, Dan," I said. "We're going to get you out. There are more of them than we like, and fewer than we can't handle. Can you hold quiet?" He nodded once, and then did it. The supplies could not wait for a second trip if the first trip brought company. The truck bed held metal crates stenciled with numbers and letters that usually mean nothing, and sometimes mean lunch. I popped two with the pry bar, MREs stacked like bricks, plastic sleeves tight, labels clean. I passed them to Mark, who loaded them into the net we'd brought. The second crate held ammunition in small cardboard boxes that had survived because they were boring to steal, unless you had a reason to prefer them to food. Mixed calibers, but enough of the right ones to matter. .308, 5.56,9 mm. Not a mountain, enough. A third crate gave us a prize. A compact generator bolted to a frame, with the manual still zip-tied to the handle, and spare spark plugs taped to the side in a bag. We kept glances brief and eyes working. Cal returned from the far side, breathing in controlled pulls, and signaled that the drift had reversed. The walkers who moved toward his noise had returned to their loops. The window was closing. I lashed the generator to the poles and let the weight drag me low. Mark and Cal took the MRE net and a set of fuel cans wedged under the truck. Lena stayed long enough to send a second shot through a skull that had meandered too close to the trailer door where Harker had lain. Clean, measured, and then she ghosted back to us. We backed out in the same order we went in. No running, no rush. Just speed in the places where speed doesn't break your ankle. Every 20 paces we paused to listen. The forest had music again. Birds back, leaves chattering, bugs doing the thankless work of summer. We didn't talk until the ground tilted up and the smell of fuel faded into leaf mold. Then we allowed ourselves 3 words each. "We got it," Mark said. "For now," Lena added. "Again soon," I finished, because supplies are only supplies if they become meals and tools before someone else writes them into their plan. Back at Black Hollow, we brought Harker into the maintenance shed and set him on the cot we'd brought from the lodge and scrubbed with vinegar and boiling water. Lena cut his pant leg and examined the line along his shin where the door frame had laid claim. No open break. Deep line that would swell angry and stay that way if we didn't persuade it down. She did the work a field medic would have recognized. Wash, disinfect, a measured wrap that didn't make a tourniquet and didn't pretend soft hands would fix hard problems. Harker drank, then slept that deep, unsupervised sleep people fall into when their body finally believes someone else is watching the door. When he woke, he ate with small, methodical bites and asked for names. We gave first names only. He didn't push for more. He told us he was part of a convoy out of the 28th Infantry Division's area, Pennsylvania Army National Guard, running a resupply loop toward a temporary staging point waypointed near Clarion County. He said they'd been ambushed on the move. He didn't know if it was people or walkers who did the most damage. He'd been below the lip of the trailer trying to keep a generator from sliding when the door came down. He had been alive since because he had good bones and something in his head that didn't swap hope for noise. That night we ate in shifts, the generator resting on a blanket to keep it from advertising its existence. We didn't run it. We just looked at it like you look at a good winter coat in October and remind yourself not to bring it to a bonfire. I wrote a list on the shed wall in pencil. What we took, what we left, what we will go back for. Lena wrote a med plan for Harker. Rest, elevation, wrap changes, low-dose antibiotics from the kit. Mark wrote a maintenance schedule for the generator because machines are happiest when they have work and rules. Cal didn't write anything. He sat on the step and watched the tree line like he owed the place a set of eyes for the water and the food. When we moved to watches, I let Cal take a slot from midnight to 2, with me sitting a dozen yards away under the dark. He didn't know I was there. He sat still, the way a person does when they have learned that fidgeting is just writing their position on the air. He faced away from the shed more than he faced toward it. He had walked alone long enough to understand where the weather comes from. In the morning, Harker asked for a map. I handed him the one Mark took from the tourist rack without a flourish. He pointed to a rough triangle between the river, the old township line, and a strip of power easement. He tapped a point near the edge of the paper. "We were headed here," he said. "Temporary depot. If it's still there, it won't be for long. If you're going to move anything heavy, do it before the crews who like heavy things decide they like it more than you do." "We go back first," I said. "Smaller party. We didn't touch the truck's cab. We didn't open the ammo in the second Humvee. There's a med bag I saw under the seat and couldn't reach with the watchers so close." "Take me," Cal said. "I know the line." "You stay," Lena countered. "You earned food and a place to sit out of the rain. You haven't earned the right to bleed near my son." Cal met her eyes and didn't flinch. "Fair," he said. "I'll work the fence." We split into 2 units, me and Mark back to the convoy, Lena with Harker at the shed, and Cal working on the perimeter straps and the bridge latch. We carried the bow, the rifle, 2 ropes, and the compact crowbar. I added a small towel to wipe metal and a spray bottle of diluted sanitizer Lena mixed. The day felt like the hinge of a door, the kind that swings either way quietly until it doesn't. The second approach felt different. Familiar ground does that. You forget to count in the same way. I forced the rhythm back into my steps and called a halt twice for no reason except to ensure we still could. We heard distant voices once, carried on the wind from somewhere beyond the ridge. Not words, only the rhythm of people who had not yet learned what the woods do to men who let sentences travel. We froze and let that wind take their syllables in the other direction. At the convoy we found the walkers in new positions but the same loops. One had become tangled in a seatbelt strap hanging from the tip trailer and pulled against it with tireless patience, leaning and then slacking, and then leaning again. Mark looked at me, eyebrows raised. I shook my head no. We would not burn rounds on an enemy doing a useful job. We would not cut a knot someone else had tied in our favor. We ghosted to the Humvee's cab and eased the door. The smell inside was old oil and dust and the ghost of a lunch that hadn't been eaten. The med bag sat under the seat with its strap looped. I dragged it out quiet and flipped the flap. Field dressings, 2 IV kits, a partial course of antibiotics, a small rolled pack of suture material, a sealed tourniquet, and a vial of something I didn't trust enough to use without a lab to tell me it wasn't a story. Good. We slid it into the pack. In the truck's cab, we found a laminated route card with waypoints and times that had been right until time stopped agreeing. I folded it and put it in my pocket. We found a pair of night vision monoculars in a case under the bench seat. One cracked useless, the other intact. Mark held it to his eye and smiled in a way that took a year off his face. We left the cracked unit. We had no room for hope deferred. On the way out, I saw a crate wedged under the seat in the second Humvee. It had a sticker on it with a red cross. I motioned Mark to cover while I worked the pry bar. The lid gave, and inside was a trauma pack, chest seals, a handful of combat gauze, gloves, and 2 sealed masks. A treasure more useful than any gold we'd ever see again. We took it and left the lid set back in place, so that from a distance it would look not worth the trip. We moved fast then, the kind of fast that doesn't make leaves protest. Back on high ground, we let our shoulders drop and allowed ourselves a long drink. Mark handed me the night vision again, like a kid passing a shell he'd found at the beach. I looked through it at the trees and let the world turn a shade that would make the difference between a safe walk and a mistake later. We went home the long way to make sure no one was reading our footprints. Back at Black Hollow, Lena had the bridge latch rigged with 2 pins that could be pulled in one motion. Cal had doubled the lashing on the palisade and repaired a corner where the rope had started to cut into soft wood. Harker slept again, color better, leg angry, but less so. We set the medkit on the table and let the contents sit like a small sun. Lena took the chest seals in both hands, the way a musician picks up an instrument that's been out of tune for too long. These, she said, could be the reason a day ends different. We ate, we sharpened, we hung the night vision on a peg above the door with a stringer so it would not walk away. We ran the generator for 10 minutes to charge the small board and to test the sound in the clearing. The noise didn't carry as far as I had feared, but it carried more than I liked. The river's voice helped hide it. We decided it would run only when the sky did not hold sound, during rain, when the wind slid through the alders, when distant thunder wrote our names for us. In the last light, Harker woke with the steadiness of a man who has woken with duties for most of his adult life. He asked for the map again. He pointed to the waypoint. If the depot is there, and if it hasn't been stripped, there will be fuel, pallets, maybe a field tent you could rig over the lodge porch to keep your watch dry. Maybe radios we can make speak, but it will not be empty for long. We go, I said, because there was no world in which we didn't. Not all at once. Not at dawn like heroes. We pick weather. We pick line. We pick fights we can end. And we end them fast. We don't get famous. Cal looked at the map, and then at the door. I owe you for the water, he said, and for taking me at the road instead of taking my shoes. I'll work perimeter if you don't want me on the walk. You'll walk, Lena said, and her tone was not forgiveness. You'll carry. We slept in shifts. Rain came after midnight and kept talking until the hour before dawn. Somewhere out there, past the ridge, and down the long hallway of trees, the walkers kept their slow meetings. Somewhere beyond that, people who liked the sound of their own voices warned one another about men like me. Tomorrow we would write our names into another piece of ground. It would try to make its claim on us, and we would try to make our claim on it. That's all survival is, in the end. Who writes the story of a place first and who keeps adding lines until the page belongs to them. Rain held into morning and gave us the cover we needed. We ate quick. Oats, a strip of venison warmed on the block stove, and a lemon drop for Lena's throat, and set the day's work on the wall where no one could forget their part. Harker would stay in the shed with the rifle across his lap and the door braced. Cal would work the bridge latch twice to be sure it wasn't the kind that fails when someone needs it. Mark and I would scout the route to the waypoint Harker marked, then return and decide if a full loadout made sense. No speeches, just the list. We wore layers that didn't shine and carried light. The night vision mono went in a padded pouch against my chest. The crossbow stayed ready, bolts wrapped in a band that didn't rattle. Mark took the short axe at his belt and the compact crowbar in his pack. Lena put a single chest seal and a bandage into my pocket without a word. When partners work long enough, language gets expensive, hands get rich. The trail Harker had pointed to wasn't a trail on any official map. It was the kind deer carve and men borrow. We moved with the rain, letting it erase our edges. The birds stayed low and busy. Twice we stopped, not because we heard something, but because the woods stopped telling their usual story. And in that space, a slow walker drifted across a gap, palms brushing saplings, head listing as if following a sound from another room. We let each pass and counted breaths to keep our timing honest. Around midday, the rain sharpened, turned the ground to a slick crust, and forced us onto the higher roots. A set of tire ruts appeared, where Harker's waypoint should have been a rumor. We crouched and touched the water pooled in one rut, cold, clear, with the small shimmer that means the last pass was days ago, not hours. The ruts cut through a stand of skinny pines and ended in a flat cut where the trees had been pushed aside long before any of us started counting supplies. The depot sat in the clearing like a camp that wasn't sure if it wanted to live. A pair of green canvas tents rode on aluminum frames. A collapsible antenna mast leaned against a crate. Pallets lay under plastic sheeting held down with stones. A short stack of fuel cans sat in a ring of mud. Someone had done work here and then stopped mid-sentence. The quiet wasn't right. It wasn't the quiet of a place abandoned. It was the quiet of a place that wanted you to be first to speak. We watched. A minute became 5. In the second tent, a flap moved, not with wind, but with the steady tug of something trying a seam. A hand showed for a moment, pale and wrong, then withdrew. I pointed to the left edge, where the pallets created a corridor, then raised 2 fingers. Mark nodded. We eased around to the back of the tent, stepping on stones, avoiding the mud that records names. The first tent was empty and still smelled faintly of bleach and canvas. The second held 2 cots, a knocked-over stool, and the slow shape of what used to be a man caught against guy lines, tangled so completely that movement had become a small circle of effort. He lifted his head at the sound of our steps and tested the lines again. The knot held. I moved in, put a bolt where it needed to go, then eased the body down and cut the lines without letting anything slap. We pulled the cot away so nothing else could catch. Under the plastic on the pallets we found order. The men who worked here had been tidy and no one had yet had time to be sloppy. Crates of MREs strapped in 5s, boxed water purifier cartridges, a set of collapsible water jugs, 2 rolls of concertina wire coiled and taped at the ends, tarps heavy enough to laugh at wind, a pair of field radios in foam-cut cases with instructions and spare batteries. The fuel cans were half full, not topped, as if the last refuel had been interrupted. We did not load everything because loading everything makes you slow and proud. We took 1 radio, 1 coil of wire, the purifier cartridges, a roll of tarp, 4 water jugs folded and stowed, and 3 MRE straps. Mark hefted a can and raised eyebrows. I shook my head. Fuel moves like gossip. You carry it and everyone knows. We marked the pallet stacks with a charcoal dot so we would know which ones were worth coming back for when we had wheels or a day with low wind. The antenna mast drew my eye. A simple tripod, lightweight sections that pin together, a coil of cable, and a compact whip head. That could give our small radio a taller voice and a better ear. Mark broke it down and stowed it in split sections across his pack so nothing swayed. We did 1 last slow circle, stayed out of the line of sight of the road cut, and withdrew the way we came. Back at Black Hollow, we brought the haul into the shed and set it out like a buffet of problems solved. Filters, jugs, tarps, wire, radio. Harker smiled with his eyes when he saw the field set. You lifted the right things, he said, calm, as if reading off a checklist he used to keep in a pocket. Lena wiped the radio with a clean cloth and read the card twice before plugging it into the small board. We didn't transmit. We listened. Static rolled in waves. Then a voice, far and thin. Repeat. Temporary site at... And then a grid coordinate that meant nothing without the right map layer. Another fragment spoke a schedule. Watch from 1800 to 2200, then noise. We logged times and fragments in a column so we could build a picture later. That evening, we rigged the antenna mast on the far side of the shed and lashed it to the corner post with 2 of the ratchet straps. Mark set a guy line to the old snack bar footing so a gust wouldn't turn it into a spear. We ran coax through a drilled hole and sealed the edges with a bead of tar. The radio's noise floor dropped a notch. More static, more edges of sentences, a channel with a tone burst that repeated every 10 minutes. Information was returning to the world like snowmelt finding old ditches. We ate and reviewed what we'd seen. The depot would not stay untouched. The walkers snared in the tent told a story. A turn inside camp, not outside. People had worked there. Someone changed. The lines held for a while, then failed. The cleanup never happened because whoever remained had bigger problems. We would have to move in weather and at hours other people avoid if we wanted to keep it. Harker agreed. People will be drawn to a place like that, he said. You either make it yours or you make it nobody's. The night patrol started quiet. I took the mono and walked the inner fence slowly. Through the green wash, the palisade looked like a drawing. The river's sheen made a ribbon beyond. Twice the device found movement where my eyes didn't. 2 walkers on the far bank moving along the water like fishermen who never learned what a rod is for, and a deer cutting across the upper path, stopping to look back at nothing. When I switched the mono off, the world came back richer, like a screen door had been removed. I made notes on the fence posts with chalk marks that meant weak lashing here and replace wire loop soon. Near midnight, a cluster of quiet feet found the roadblock. We heard them before we saw the shape, the way you hear the difference between feet that claim a place and feet that ask permission. I slid to the lodge corner and set the crossbow low. Cal and Lena moved to positions without speaking. A beam of light flicked once and died. Someone whispered, "Hold," and the whisper carried like a blade. 3 people pushed at the RV, found it didn't move, and started testing the fence. Not loud, not drunk, methodical. They wanted in. They had done this elsewhere. The first clatter of our glass bottle line broke the quiet like a fork dropped in church. The figures froze. One hissed at another. A minute passed. Then one of them stepped over the rope, careful, and placed a hand on the palisade lashing we had doubled. The strap held. He tested again, using his whole weight. It still held. I stepped out of the shadow far enough that the silhouette made sense without details. "Not tonight," I said. The nearest figure turned toward my voice, hands out from his sides. "We just need a place to sleep," he said. "We can pay." "Pay somewhere else," I answered. "There's water on the far side of the lot and a flat spot beyond the sign. If you stay quiet and gone by first light." He looked past me, searching for a shape he could argue with. He didn't find one. The second person, a woman by the posture, touched his sleeve and tugged once. They backed up. We watched them take the flat spot. We watched them drink. We watched them not light anything. We did not invite them in, and we did not punish them for asking. Some nights the line holds because everyone chooses not to break it. Morning carried a smell of river and sap. The strangers had gone, leaving only boot prints and the faint circle where a pack had sat. We ate, then set the day's plan. A fast run to the depot with the cart to pull 2 pallet straps worth of MREs and 1 more coil of wire. Cal asked to come. Lena looked at him, then at me. I nodded. He had earned a slot closer than the fence. The run-in held no surprises. The tents sat the way we left them. The pallet covers still lay snug. We loaded fast, tied the cart quiet, and set back with the weight pulling at our pace without dragging it. On the return, the woods closed up in that way they do when weather shifts and animals decide to be someplace else. At the last ridge before Black Hollow, Cal raised a hand and bent to the ground. Boot prints. More than 2. Fresh. The kind that don't sink deep because the people wearing them know where to put their weight. We left the cart tucked in a blowdown and moved the last quarter mile on foot. The RV at the entrance looked as it had, but the palisade lashing at the corner by the snack bar showed a new rub that hadn't been there at dawn. I smelled old smoke and a faint trace of something cooked that wasn't food. A small scrap of cloth hung from a nail at knee height, torn. We stopped at once. Inside the perimeter, Lena had set the bridge latch and moved the generator under the workbench. Harker sat at the door with the rifle across his lap and the radio's handset near his knee. His eyes were not on us. They were on the far fence where a section of sapling had shifted inward a finger's width. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. We spread out. I found the track at the fence. A scuff where someone placed a boot carefully, then decided not to risk the push. The chalk mark I'd made last night on that post sat smudged. Someone else's palm had tested it. Cal walked the inner path and found a torn zipper pull near the pump house. Not ours. He held it up, then pocketed it like a man keeping receipts. We met at the shed and set the circle tighter. 2 more tripwires at shin height in the blind corners. The bell line brought inside so any touch started sound next to our ears rather than beyond them. We agreed on a code for trouble that didn't use our names. 3 short taps on the doorframe for left, 2 for right, 1 long for bridge, I drew it on the wall because writing turns agreements into rules. That evening, the radio found a stronger voice. North Clarion repeater. Listen only if you can't secure your site. Multiple groups moving along the county line. Avoid use of generators without cover. Avoid floodlight. Repeat. The voice clipped into static and then returned with a list of road numbers we knew. I shut the radio off and wrote the road numbers on the inside of my forearm with a grease pencil so I wouldn't have to light anything to remember them. After dark, we heard their steps before they reached the RV. Not the soft ask of the last group. This group wore their plan like a jacket. 4 people by the count of their breath and the way their weight moved. One carried something heavy that clinked against metal. They didn't whisper. They didn't pretend the camp might be empty. The first person slapped the RV panel twice, calling an absent dog. Evening, a man said, voice flat. We're here for a share. Fuel, food, and a look at what you're keeping so we can set a fair rate. Not this camp, I said from the shadow in front of the lodge. You'll move on, and you'll do it now. He laughed, small and friendly and wrong. We're neighbors. Neighbors share. Neighbors ask, I answered. You'll still pass through. Nothing here for you tonight. Silence stretched. One of them tested the palisade again and found the strap. They fixed the lashings, he muttered to his friend. Tight work. Last chance, I said. The sentence turned the air thinner. A metal clink answered, the sound of a hook on wire. I pictured the concertina coils in the shed and what a person with little imagination would do with them. I raised my hand, and the bell line chimed once as Lena pulled it to wake the camp. In that small sound, the world balanced. The man counted to 3 out loud like a referee. On 2, Cal dropped the pins on the bridge latch. The far plank loosed and fell into the river with a controlled splash. The sound rolled out beyond the fence like a promise kept. The men at the RV heard it and did their own math. Someone said, they just locked their back door. Another said, or ours. Lena put the rifle on the porch rail, where only the silhouette mattered, and set the bolt home with a sound that carries meaning across politics and time. Mark stepped into the doorway with the crossbow low. Harker shifted his weight just enough to let the people outside know he was awake, and owed the night nothing. The man at the RV clucked his tongue, then scuffed his boot hard on the gravel to show he had opinions about the situation. After a moment that belonged to no one, they withdrew. Their steps faded toward the old road. We did not follow. We did not celebrate. We did what you do when a storm skirts your fence. You check your lashings again and write the new weather on your wall. We slept in watches that night, shorter than usual. The river kept talking. The wind shifted and returned the scent of wet canvas and old fire. In the morning we set to work like farmers after a frost. Fix what can be fixed and pretend nothing else broke. We raised the bridge plank with a pulley line so we could drop and raise it without leaving cover. Mark showed Lena how to work the line with gloves so the rope wouldn't bite. Cal rewove the lashings at the palisade corner where the strap had worn. I laid the concertina along the inner fence on hooks that let it drop into place in a second if a person insisted on entering with a speech. Midday brought a new voice from the radio, closer, less clipped. Clarion East, this is K3. Then static, then, if anyone reads, avoid Route 36 near Cooksburg. Large group moving south-southwest, unhurried. Repeat. We looked at the map. That road and that direction would put them near us by the end of the week if they preferred wood to asphalt. We started planning like people who expected company. We couldn't live at Black Hollow without becoming the kind of people who believed fences are a future. Fences are only pauses. The depot would be targeted. The convoy site would draw others who read sign. Our best plan was to keep moving small things here until we had enough to move ourselves again, then decide where the next pause would be. I told Harker this. He nodded. Mobile defense, he said. Ugly, effective. We did one more run to the depot in hard rain, took the rest of the water jugs and one more strap of meals, then unpinned the tent poles and laid the canvas flat so anyone who came after would have to work for their shelter instead of taking ours. On the way back, a slow cluster of walkers appeared on the ridge and studied us without interest, then drifted into the laurel like shoppers leaving without buying. We stepped around where they had been and didn't let gravel grind under our boots. By late afternoon, the wind built and with it came the kind of weather that erases tracks and brushes sound off branches. We used it. We tested the generator under a tarp, plugged in the radio to top off its batteries, and ran the water pump through the filter to fill the jugs we'd brought. Lena boiled a pot and set a second pot with a towel for steam, then placed the lemon drops next to the spoon like a joke that still makes sense. Harker ate half an MRE and saved the cracker for later. Habit shows when a man saves the bland thing. After dark, I took the mono and walked the line again. In the green wash, the RV became a wall, the palisade a darker line inside the dark. 3 walkers tested the outer fence with open palms and found no story worth following. A fox moved along the riverbank on silent feet, paused at the bridge gap, then chose the stones. A smudge on the far side looked like the remains of a cook fire no one had admitted to building. I marked the post nearest to it with a chalk X and went back for Cal. We crossed the bridge with the plank lowered halfway, rope in hand to raise it quick if the woods threw us a surprise, and we used our feet to erase someone else's ash. Morning came without visitors. We ate early and set to the work of being people again, mending, sharpening, checking the radio at the top of each hour, writing down the useful sounds. Harker's color climbed back toward normal. He moved his leg in small arcs to keep it honest and didn't complain when pain did what pain does. He asked Mark about the power board, and Mark answered like an apprentice who has waited for a journeyman to ask him real questions. The two of them sketched a small box to manage charging cycles so we wouldn't burn out the battery bank. In another life, it would have been a school project. Here it was, the reason the next week had lights. Near noon, the bridge bell rang once. Light, almost polite. Lena took the door while I edged to the side. A single figure stood at the far end, not the walk of a dead thing, not the stance of a man with a plan to take something. A woman this time, late 20s by my guess, clothes too clean for someone who had been out long. She raised both hands, palms empty, then knelt to set down a pack, backed away 3 steps, and called across in a voice that carried just enough. "I'm looking for a person named Cal. If he's here, tell him Becky from Tylersburg says he still owes her a screwdriver." Cal stepped to the edge of the shed's shadow and let his face show. He didn't smile. He did something harder. He relaxed his shoulders a fraction. "Becky," he said. She nodded. "Looking for a place to stand for an hour and not get pushed. I've got news." We brought her across, checked her pack without touching anything we didn't need to, and gave her a seat on the porch step with a cup of hot water and a clean spoon to hold. She drank, looked at the bridge, looked at our work, and the look said she had seen worse and better and understood why ours was the way it was. "Group of 6 moving down the old logging track from the east," she said. 2 with long guns, 1 with a crowbar on a lanyard like a trophy, 1 who talks too much. They pulled a cart yesterday. Today no cart. They were asking about a camp with a sign that used to say quiet hours. I didn't correct them. "Thank you," I said, and meant it. "Any idea how far?" "Half day if they don't stop to argue," she answered. "Less if they smell smoke." We paid her in the only currency that doesn't make noise, half a strap of meals and a coil of paracord, plus a screwdriver wrapped in cloth. She smiled at the last and slipped it into her pocket with ceremony. "You'll want to make your place smaller," she said, standing, "and louder to the right people." We did both. We pulled the cart into the shed and stacked gear inside to free the lodge, then dragged pallets across the clearing to create noise mazes. Nothing that would stop men with will, everything that would slow feet and scrape shins and make people second-guess routes. We laid the concertina in a C shape behind the palisade, so if someone did breach the first line, they'd have to choose between backing into blades or climbing into sight. We cut a peephole in the lodge wall at knee height so a person lying prone could evaluate a situation without lifting their head. We also made the place louder to allies. Mark hung a small strip of cloth high in a beech tree outside the fence, just off the main approach, a neutral color marked with 3 short slashes. Anyone who had walked with us before would read it. Anyone else would miss it. It said, "There are people here who count and prefer not to be counted." Late afternoon, the wind died, and with it came that specific stillness that makes dogs sit up and men reach for better shoes. The first figure appeared at the RV. He didn't bother with his hands up. He leaned against the panel like a guest ready to talk about rules. Behind him, 5 others arranged themselves into a shape that said this conversation had been held elsewhere with good results. "We're back," the first man announced. "We decided we like your fence." I stood where the lodge shadow broke my outline. "We didn't decide we like your plan," I replied. He set the crowbar head down and rested his palms on it like a walking stick. "We can do this with numbers, or we can do this with neighbors," he said. "Your choice." I let the sentence hang. Lena moved to the peephole I'd cut. Cal took the pump house corner with the crossbow. Harker sat in the shed doorway with the rifle quiet in his lap. Mark, at the far corner, placed his foot on the line that would drop the concertina and looked at me for the nod he hoped he wouldn't need. "Numbers get tired," I said. "Neighbors bring soup. I don't see soup." He laughed and showed the kind of teeth that have seen too many hard meals. "You've got jokes. That's new." His hand slid down the crowbar and closed on it in a way that changed the air. The first man to his left stepped forward and pressed a hand against the palisade. He didn't knock. He pulled, slow and testing, like he wanted to hear how well it had been built. The concertina wire we'd strung earlier still held, but the way the wood groaned said they'd chosen a seam. Another step, another tug. I gave Mark the signal. He let the loop of wire he'd been holding fall, and the sea of concertina snapped into place with a metallic hiss, dropping down like a closing jaw. The man yanked his hand back and swore. His glove tore. Blood welled fast from a slash across his palm. That changed the temperature of the standoff. The leader stopped grinning. He scanned the wire, our positions, the rifle barrels just barely visible through the slats. I stayed where I was, center of the bridge, no weapon raised. Yet. "You know how this ends," the leader called out. "There's not enough food out here for everyone, so we'll take ours and leave. No one needs to die over a bag of rice." He didn't wait for a response. He gave a hand signal. Crooked fingers slashed forward, and the 2 men nearest the fence raised what looked like bolt cutters and hatchets. The 4th stayed behind, watching the tree line behind us like he expected backup. Maybe he had it. Maybe not. Didn't matter anymore. "Mark," I barked. The crossbow behind me twanged. The bolt took one of them in the leg. He collapsed into the brush, yelping and swearing, trying to crawl backward. His buddy moved to grab him, but Cal fired from the high platform and clipped the second man in the shoulder. He dropped the bolt cutters and staggered, bleeding but upright. I raised my rifle, but I didn't fire. I waited for the leader to make a decision. He did. He screamed something guttural and charged the bridge, crowbar in hand. Lena shot him. 2 shots, both aimed low. First in the thigh, then the hip. He dropped fast and slid against the wood slats of the bridge, groaning. The one who'd been keeping watch turned and ran, crashing through brush and branches without looking back. We advanced fast and clean. Mark and I crossed the bridge with our rifles drawn. Lena stayed behind with Harker in case this was a feint. Cal dropped down from the platform and moved wide, sweeping the left flank. The wounded ones were still breathing. "Help us," one gasped, holding his leg where the bolt stuck out. "You can pull it out. I won't come back." "You already came once," I said. The leader was gurgling something. I knelt beside him, keeping the rifle pressed to his chest. His eyes were pale blue. They didn't match the rest of him. Scruffy, scarred, filthy. The kind of guy who'd been a bully before the world ended, and liked that the collapse gave him permission to go further. He tried to speak again. I leaned closer. "This ain't your land," he whispered. "You think this fence'll save you? Others are coming. You'll see." We did what had to be done. We left the bodies outside the tree line, 100 yards from camp, tied upright with their arms lashed to fence posts we'd scavenged from the tent village. One of the bodies we stripped to the waist and carved a message into his chest with charcoal from the fire pit. "No warnings next time." That night we burned the clothes, wiped down the weapons, reset the wire. Everyone took a shift on watch. Harker didn't say much. Neither did Mark. Lena cleaned her rifle, reassembled it, and sat next to Cal without speaking. I stayed up until the sun broke. No one came the next day, or the next week. We saw a few infected drift by the outer boundary, sniffing the air and lurching towards sound when a squirrel scattered leaves. We took turns checking the road. The bodies stayed where they were, bloating and blackening with heat, eventually picked at by birds. We moved them before they became a health hazard, but the posts remained. The message did too. Then came a strange thing. Nothing happened. For weeks. Maybe it was the cold creeping in. Maybe the nearest groups of scavengers saw what we left and decided the forest had easier pickings. Maybe it was just luck. But for the next several weeks, we worked. We hunted. We reinforced. We harvested rainwater in barrels and filtered it with charcoal and sand. Lena built a pulley system for the garden netting. Cal and Mark finished sealing the old camp perimeter with scrap fencing they'd found in an overgrown trailhead. Harker read every day, even the same books twice. His voice got steadier on the radio. We played chess with found pieces. A deer wandered close enough for Mark to take it with one shot from the bow. We smoked the meat and cured the hide. Each week, I carved another notch into the cedar post near the eastern gate. A week, then another, until 30 marks stood in a tidy row, each one proof we'd lasted another stretch of bad air, cold rain, and quiet questions. Some nights I walked the perimeter with the radio on low. Static, sometimes voices. One time a woman read poetry. Another time a man named Baker from somewhere near Altoona listed a schedule of bartering hours at his camp. I copied it down, though we didn't plan on leaving. And for now, we weren't safe, but we were ready.